The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had never seen such silence. Thousands of alien delegates from across the known galaxy sat in their floating seats, watching the massive holographic display that showed the human star system, Earth, hung there like a small blue marble. Peaceful and quiet, Ambassador Zethar of the Velkin Empire stepped forward on his 6 legs. His gray skin gleamed under the bright lights, and his 4 eyes looked coldly at the assembled crowd. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The human problem ends today, he announced. For too long we have watched these violent creatures spread across their local space. They fight wars over small patches of land. They kill their own kind for resources. They are a danger to all civilized life in the galaxy. The alien delegates nodded in agreement. Everyone knew about humans. They came from a world where everything tried to kill them. Their planet had deadly storms, poisonous creatures, and environments that would kill most intelligent species in minutes. The humans had somehow survived and thrived in these conditions, but that made them dangerous. The Velkin Empire, with the full support of the Galactic Council, hereby demands the complete surrender of the human species. Zethar continued. They have 30 standard cycles to comply. All human military forces will be disbanded. All humans will relocate to designated colony worlds under our protection. Their violent nature will be controlled through proper guidance. The holographic display changed to show massive Velkin fleets gathering at the edge of human space, hundreds of ships, each one larger than anything humans had ever built. The message was clear: resist and die. Far away from the Galactic Council, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty. He was 45 years old, with gray hair and scars on his hands from years of military service. His ship patrolled the outer edge of human space, watching for any signs of alien activity. Communication Officer Lieutenant Sam Davis turned toward him with a worried expression. Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. It's marked urgent. Put it through, Morrison said, settling into his command chair. The main screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Roy Bennett's weathered face. The old man looked tired, but his eyes burned with determination. Behind him, the Earth Defense Command Center buzzed with activity. All patrol captains, listen carefully. Bennett began. We have received an ultimatum from something called the Velkin Empire. They're demanding our complete surrender. They want us to give up our ships, our weapons, and our freedom. They say they'll protect us if we become their servants. Morrison felt his jaw clench. He had fought in 3 different wars, always defending human colonies from various threats. The idea of surrender made his stomach turn. Bennett continued. The enemy has gathered a massive fleet. Our intelligence suggests they have over 2,000 ships massing at our borders. They outnumber us by at least 50 to 1. They expect us to see their strength and give up without a fight. On Earth, President Lisa Hamilton sat in the emergency session of the Global Defense Council. The room was deep underground, protected by layers of armor and shields. Around the table sat the most powerful people on the planet, all looking at the same terrible numbers. Show me the fleet composition. Again, Hamilton ordered. The holographic display in the center of the table lit up, showing the Velkin formation. Each ship was marked with Data about its size, weapons, and estimated crew, the numbers were frightening. 2,300 ships reported. General Pete Collins, head of space defense. Their smallest vessels are twice the size of our destroyers. Their largest ships are mobile battle stations with enough firepower to glass continent. Dr. Kate Williams, Earth's leading expert on alien species, leaned forward in her chair. She was young for such an important position, only 32, but she had studied every known alien race. For the past decade, the Velkin come from a world they call Paradise Prime. She explained, perfect weather, no dangerous animals, abundant food and resources. Their entire species evolved without facing any real threats. When they expanded into space, they found that most other intelligent species were similar garden worlds producing soft civilizations. What does that mean for us? Hamilton asked. It means they have no idea what they're dealing with. Williams replied, every species they've conquered before surrendered quickly. When faced with overwhelming force, they assume we'll do the same because that's what civilized beings do when faced with impossible odds. Back on the Liberty, Morrison studied the intelligence reports streaming in from Earth Command. The Velcan had already sent messages to every human colony offering the same deal: surrender now and live as protected subject, or resist and face complete annihilation. Some of the outer colonies were already debating surrender. The farming worlds had no military defenses and millions of civilians to protect. The mining stations in the asteroid belt were isolated and vulnerable. Fear was spreading through human space like a plague. Captain Lieutenant Davis called out, we receiving responses from other patrol ships. Most are requesting orders to fall back to Earth for the defense of the home system. Morrison nodded slowly. It was the logical choice. Concentrate all human forces around Earth and make the enemy pay for every mile of space. But something about that plan felt wrong. To him, his communication officer interrupted his thoughts. Sir, we have an incoming transmission from the Velcan fleet. They're demanding we identify ourselves and state our intentions. Put them through, Morrison ordered. The screen flickered, showing a Vulcan commander aboard what looked like the bridge of a massive warship. The aliens, for eyes, studied Morrison with obvious contempt. Human vessel, you are in violation of Galactic Council regulations, the alien said through translation device. Return to your home system immediately and prepare for peaceful occupation. Resistance will result in the complete destruction of your species. Morrison stood up slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth ship Liberty. We're conducting routine patrol in sovereign human space. You have no authority here. The Velcan commander's eyes narrowed. Sovereign space, primitives from a death world have no right to claim territory. You exist only because the civilized galaxy has shown mercy. That mercy has limits. Let me make something clear, Morrison replied, his voice steady and cold. Humans don't beg for mercy. We earn our place in the universe through our own strength. If you want our worlds, you'll have to take them. The alien looked genuinely puzzled. You would choose extinction over peaceful subjugation. Your entire species would die for the sake of pride. Morrison smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You call it pride, we call it being human. You have 30 cycles to get out of our space. After that, we'll consider your presence an act of war. The transmission ended abruptly around the bridge of the Liberty. The crew exchanged glances. They all knew what this meant. War was coming and the odds were impossible. Lieutenant Davis spoke quietly. Captain, should we send word to Earth? Command about this contact. Send everything, Morrison ordered. Tell them the Velcan expect us to roll over and die quietly. Tell them we have other plans. As the Liberty turned back toward human space, Morrison looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, an entire empire was preparing to crush humanity. They thought it would be easy. They thought humans were just another species that would surrender when faced with superior force. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Humans came from a world that had spent millions of years trying to kill them. They had survived ice ages, plagues, natural disasters, and wars that would have destroyed softer species. They had learned to fight when cornered, to never give up when their survival was at stake. The Velcan Empire wanted a war with Deathers. They were about to get exactly what they asked for. The answer came not through words but through action. Captain Jake Morrison did not retreat. When the first Velcan scout ships crossed into human space, instead he ordered his small patrol fleet forward to meet them. The Liberty moved through space alongside 2 other human destroyers. The Defiance and the Courage. Against them came 12 Velcan reconnaissance vessels, each one twice the size of the human ships. The alien captains expected the humans to turn and run when they saw the odds. They were wrong. Morrison stood on his bridge, watching the enemy formation approach. His tactical officer, Commander Lisa Brooks, called out ranges and targeting solutions. The weapons officer, Lieutenant Tony Garcia, waited with his hands ready over the firing controls. Enemy vessels are hailing us, reported the communications officer. They're demanding our immediate surrender. No response, Morrison ordered. All ships attack pattern Delta. Show them what humans do when cornered. The battle lasted exactly 47 minutes. When it ended, 3 human destroyers had turned 12 Vulcan scout ships into expanding clouds of metal and gas. The human ships were damaged but still fighting. Velcan ships were simply gone. The difference came down to one simple fact that the aliens had never considered. Human ships were built to operate in conditions that would kill their crews. Human crews were trained to fight while pulling acceleration forces that would turn alien bodies into liquid, while Velcan ships had to limit their speed and maneuvers to keep their crews alive. Human vessels could twist and dive through space like angry hornets. The aliens found themselves trying to hit targets that moved in ways their computers said were impossible. Morrison's ship took direct hits from alien weapons, but his crew kept fighting even as sections of the hull vented. Atmosphere damage control teams worked in spaces filled with toxic smoke and radiation. They sealed breaches with their bare hands and kept the weapons firing until the last enemy ship was destroyed. The news of the victory spread through human space faster than the official reports. On Luna Base, Commander Alex Turner received the battle recordings and smiled grimly. He was preparing the 3rd Marine Battalion for deployment, and the footage gave his troops exactly what they needed to see. Turner's Marines were not ordinary soldiers. They were volunteers from Earth's most extreme environments, men and women who had survived combat in the Antarctic wastelands where the cold could freeze a person solid in minutes. Mountain warfare specialists who had fought at altitudes where the air was too thin for most humans to even breathe. There were deep-sea combat veterans who could function in crushing pressure and total darkness. Desert fighters who had learned to battle in heat that would cook alien flesh in hours. Arctic commandos who saw temperatures of -50 degrees as merely uncomfortable. Listen up, Turner addressed his assembled troops in the briefing hall. The enemy thinks we're soft because we come from a death world. They think our planet made us weak. They're about to learn the opposite is true. He activated the holographic display showing images of typical Vulcan worlds, garden planets with perfect climates, gentle weather, and abundant resources. No predators, no natural disasters, no environments that challenge the beings who lived there. Their soldiers have never had to fight in conditions worse than a mild rainstorm. Turner continued, we're going to show them what warriors from Earth can do in real combat situations. Meanwhile, in the orbital shipyards around Earth, engineer Paul Rodriguez worked around the clock to modify human warships. The changes he was making would have seemed insane to any alien observer who understood them. Rodriguez was installing armor made from compressed asteroid materials that could only be shaped using techniques developed in Earth's deepest mines. Metal was so dense that most species would be crushed by its weight, but human construction crews handled it like it was ordinary steel. The weapon systems were being upgraded with power sources that generated heat signatures matching small stars. Any other species would have evacuated their ships rather than work around such dangerous equipment, but human engineers saw it as just another challenging project. The cooling systems alone would kill most alien crews. Rodriguez explained to his team, the radiation from our power cores would give them cancer in hours. But we've been working with this stuff since we started splitting atoms on Earth at Peterson Space Force Base. Colonel Nancy Foster briefed her fighter pilots on new tactical doctrines. These were not the careful, methodical strategies that dominated galactic warfare. These were tactics based on Earth's most violent sports and combat traditions. Forget everything you know about civilized space combat, Foster told the assembled pilots. The enemy expects us to fight like gentlemen. They expect orderly formations, predictable maneuvers, and reasonable tactics. We're going to fight like what we are, predators from a world that spent millions of years trying to kill us. The new tactics included ramming attacks at speeds that would liquefy alien crews, boarding actions conducted in hard vacuum without environmental suits, combat maneuvers that took advantage of human ability to function while injured or under extreme stress. Foster's pilots came from backgrounds that had prepared them for exactly this kind of warfare. Former test pilots who had survived crashes that should have been fatal, combat veterans who had learned to fly damaged aircraft through storms and enemy fire, astronauts who had worked in the radiation fields around Jupiter's moons. The enemy has never fought anyone who could survive what we consider normal operating conditions, Foster explained. When their ships lose life support, their crews die in minutes. When our ships lose life support, we put on masks and keep fighting. On Earth, itself, President Lisa Hamilton, coordinated the global response to the Vulcan ultimatum. Every human colony had been given the same choice: surrender or face annihilation. The response from across human space was the same everywhere: no surrender, no retreat, no mercy for tyrants. Dr. Kate Williams monitored alien communications from her command center. Deep in the Rocky Mountains, the facility had been built to survive direct nuclear strikes, and it was currently the most secure location on Earth. The Vulcan are confused by our response, she reported to the president. Their intercepts of our communications show they can't understand why we're not negotiating. They keep expecting us to ask for terms or offer partial surrender. Hamilton looked at the status reports streaming in from across human space. Every colony was preparing for siege. Every military unit was moving to battle positions. Even the civilian population was organizing resistance cells and evacuation plans. Do they understand what they're facing? Hamilton asked. Williams shook her head. They think we're bluffing. Their psychology profiles suggest they can't comprehend a species that would choose extinction over slavery. In their minds, the logical response to overwhelming force is always surrender. In the asteroid belt, mining engineer Chris Hayes was turning industrial equipment into weapons of war. The massive plasma cutters used to slice apart asteroids could burn through any known armor. The rock haulers designed to move millions of tons of material could carry enough explosives to destroy small moons. Hayes had worked in the belt for 15 years, operating in conditions that would terrify most sapient beings: the vacuum of space, the radiation from solar flares, the constant danger of equipment failure in an environment where the slightest mistake meant death. We've been preparing for this our whole lives without knowing it, he told his crew as they modified mining ships for combat. Every day we work out here is training for conditions that would kill softer species in seconds. The converted mining vessels looked nothing like traditional warships, but they carried firepower that matched heavy cruisers. More importantly, they were crewed by humans who saw the vacuum of space as just another workplace hazard. As the 30-cycle deadline approached, the Vulcan Empire watched human preparations with growing bewilderment. Every intelligence report contradicted their understanding of how civilized species should behave when faced with superior force. Human ships were not retreating to defensive positions around their home world. Instead, they were spreading out across space, taking positions that seemed designed for offensive operations. Human military communication spoke casually of scenarios that would constitute absolute horror for any rational being. They discussed boarding actions in hard vacuum as routine procedures. They planned combat operations in radiation fields that should have been instantly lethal. They talked about fighting while wounded in ways that should have incapacitated them permanently. Most disturbing of all, intercepted civilian communications showed no signs of panic or despair. Human families were saying goodbye to each other with calm determination, not the terror that should have gripped a doomed species. The Vulcan had given humanity 30 cycles to surrender. Instead, humanity had used that time to prepare for a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were about to discover that threatening The survival of Deathworlders was the worst mistake they could possibly make. The countdown timer continued its relentless march toward zero, but now it was the Velkin Empire that should have been afraid. They had wanted to fight. Humans and they were about to get exactly what they had asked for. Main Velkin fleet arrived at Earth, expecting to find a broken species ready to surrender. Instead, they found empty space where the human defense fleet should have been waiting. Admiral Keth Vor of the Velkin Navy stared at his tactical displays in confusion. Where are they? He demanded of his intelligence officer. Our scouts reported at least 200 human vessels in this system 3 cycles ago. Intelligence officer, a nervous young Velkin named Sithda, checked his instruments again. Sir, I'm detecting massive energy signatures throughout the asteroid belt, but they don't match any known ship configurations. It's almost as if the humans have disappeared. What the Velkin didn't understand was that humans had spent the past 30 cycles hiding their entire fleet inside the asteroid belt itself. Ships had been powered down to minimal life support and concealed within hollowed-out rocks. The crews had survived in conditions that would have killed any other species. Within hours, Captain Morrison floated in the darkened bridge of the Liberty, watching through a small viewport as the Velkin fleet passed less than 1,000 km away. His ship had been hiding inside an asteroid for 26 days. His crew had been breathing recycled air and eating emergency rations while living in temperatures barely above freezing. For humans, these were merely uncomfortable conditions. For any other known species, it would have been a death sentence. All ships, Morrison whispered into his communication device, execute operation Death World. Show them what predators can do. Across the asteroid belt, 200 human ships suddenly came to life. They burst from their hiding places like ancient sea monsters rising from the depths. The Velkin formation spread out in the organized patterns of civilized warfare, found themselves under attack from every direction at once. Morrison's ship led the first assault wave with a maneuver that violated every rule of space combat. The Liberty accelerated directly toward the Velkin flagship at nearly the speed of light, its hull reinforced with materials that could only be forged in the heart of a star. The Vulcan admiral watched in horror as the human ship came straight at him. Evasive maneuvers, he shouted, but his massive flagship was too slow to avoid the collision. The Liberty struck the Velkin command ship like a bullet, hitting paper. Morrison's vessel built to survive impacts that would shatter normal materials, punch through the enemy's shields and armor as if they didn't exist. The human ship disappeared into the alien vessel's hull, its crew still fighting even as they were surrounded by the wreckage of their enemy's bridge. Throughout the battle zone, similar scenes played out as human ships used tactics that no civilized species would even consider. They rammed enemy vessels at impossible speeds. They fought damaged ships that should have been abandoned. They continued attacking even when their own vessels were breaking apart around them. Commander Alex Turner's marine assault ships moved through the chaos like sharks through blood. His troops had trained for exactly this kind of combat, boarding enemy vessels in the vacuum of space while wearing armor that could function in conditions that would instantly kill alien crews. Turner himself led the assault on a Vulcan heavy cruiser. his Marines, cutting through the hull with plasma torches while enemy fire rained down. Around them, the alien crew watched in disbelief as human soldiers fought in hard vacuum without environmental suits, using only breathing masks and pressure gear. How are they still alive? Screamed a Vulcan officer as Turner's team breached the ship's main corridor. The radiation levels in this section would kill anyone in minutes. Turner smiled behind his breathing mask. We come from a world where radiation is just another workplace hazard, he said, as his Marines swept through the ship. Capturing it deck by deck, the humans fought in ways that seemed impossible to their enemies when their ships lost atmosphere. They put on masks and continued fighting. When their weapons overheated, they switched to backup systems that operated at temperatures that would melt alien equipment. When they were wounded, they kept fighting with injuries that would have incapacitated any other species. Engineer Paul Rodriguez commanded a converted mining ship called the Sledgehammer. His vessel looked nothing like a traditional warship, but it carried industrial plasma cutters that could slice through any known armor. Rodriguez had spent 15 years working in the asteroid belt, and to him, destroying enemy ships was just another construction project. Target their engine section, he told his crew as they closed in on a Vulcan destroyer. Cut them apart piece by piece, just like we do with the big rocks. The Sledgehammer's plasma cutters went to work slicing through the enemy ship's hull with surgical precision. The Vulcan crew tried to return fire, but their weapons couldn't penetrate the mining ship's industrial-grade armor plating. Rodriguez had learned his trade in the harshest environments. Humanity knew the vacuum of space, the crushing gravity of large asteroids, and the constant threat of equipment failure in places where help was days away. Fighting alien warships was actually easier than his regular job. Dr. Kate Williams monitored the battle from her command center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. The facility was designed to survive direct nuclear strikes, and from here she could track every aspect of the fighting through quantum communication links. The Vulcan are sending panic transmissions to their home fleet, she reported to President Hamilton. They're calling us savage primitives who fight like demons. They can't understand how we're surviving conditions that should kill us. Instantly, the intercepted alien communications made for fascinating reading. Vulcan officers described human crews who continued operating ships that were more wreckage than vessel. They reported boarding parties who fought in radiation fields that registered lethal on every known scale. They spoke of human soldiers who seemed to grow more dangerous as conditions became more desperate. Colonel Nancy Foster's fighter squadrons moved through the battle like wolves hunting in a pack. Her pilots used maneuvers based on the aerial combat tactics of Earth's most vicious predators. They struck from unexpected angles, disappeared into debris fields, and reappeared to attack again. Foster herself flew a modified fighter that had been built to operate in the radiation fields around Jupiter. Her ship could function in environments that would fry the electronics of any alien vessel, and she used this advantage to strike at enemies who thought they were safely hidden. Raptor Squadron, this is lead. She radioed to her pilots. Remember, these aliens have never fought anyone who could survive what we call normal conditions. Use it against them. Her Fighters dove through the wreckage of destroyed ships, using the debris for cover while hunting larger prey. They fought in the radioactive aftermath of nuclear explosions, pursuing enemy vessels into areas that alien crews couldn't follow. The battle raged for 6 hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Vulcan had brought overwhelming numbers to fight a conventional space battle. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that used the harsh conditions of space itself as a weapon. Human ships continued fighting even when they should have been destroyed. Human crews operated in environments that would have forced alien vessels to retreat. Human warriors used tactics based on millions of years of evolution on a world that had tried to kill them every single day. When the Vulcan finally managed to destroy a human ship, they discovered that the crews had been fighting until the very last second. The wreckage showed evidence of damage control efforts that continued even as the hull was breaking apart. The humans had never stopped trying to save their vessels and continue the fight. Admiral Kethfor watched his fleet disappear around him and finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. These weren't civilized beings who would surrender when faced with superior force. These were predators from a death world, creatures who had learned to fight in conditions that would break any other species. His communications officer managed one last transmission before the bridge exploded around them. Command, this is Admiral Kethfor. The humans are not what we expected. They fight like nothing we've ever encountered. They seem to thrive in conditions that should kill them. We may have made a terrible mistake. The transmission ended in static as the flagship's reactor went critical across the battlefield. The remnants of the Vulcan fleet scattered in all directions, carrying word of humanity's impossible victory back to their empire. The galaxy was about to learn that threatening Deathworlders was the most dangerous mistake any species could make. Humanity had shown that they were not victims to be protected, but predators to be feared. News of the human victory spread through the galaxy like fire through dry grass. The Galactic Council chambers, which had been silent during the Vulcan ultimatum, now buzzed with shocked conversations as representatives tried to understand what had happened. Ambassador Trail 9 of the Aquatic Federation stared at the battle recordings with 4 of his large eyes, while his other 2 remained focused on the data streams. His species had surrendered to the Vulcan Empire after a single demonstration of their fleet power. Now he watched humans destroy that same fleet using tactics that seemed impossible. They fought inside the wreckage of their own ships. He whispered to his aide. Their crews continued operating in vacuum conditions that would kill our people in seconds. How is this possible? Across the chamber, Representative Yath of the Crystal Commune was having similar thoughts. Her people had given up their home world to the Vulcan without firing a single shot, convinced that resistance was futile. Now she watched human marines boarding enemy vessels in hard vacuum, fighting radiation fields that registered lethal on every known scale. The recordings showed things that violated everything the galaxy knew about civilized warfare. Human ships ramming enemy vessels at speeds that should have liquefied their crews. Human soldiers fighting with injuries that would have incapacitated any other species. Human engineers working on damaged reactors that were flooding their ships with deadly radiation. Admiral Roy Bennett coordinated the human counteroffensive. From the bridge of the UES Vengeance, massive dreadnought built in the shipyards around Titan, the ship had been constructed using techniques learned from building structures in Earth's most extreme environments, and it could operate in conditions that would force other vessels to retreat. All fleet commanders, this is Bennett, he broadcast to the human forces spreading across 3 star systems. The enemy is retreating, but we're not done yet. They came to our space talking about mercy while threatening genocide. Time to show them what real consequences look like. The human fleet moved through space using formations that confused alien observers instead of the orderly battle lines preferred by civilized species. Human ships moved like predator packs. They used asteroid fields for cover, struck from multiple directions simultaneously, and disappeared back into the void before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Captain Amy Clark led the 5th Strike Squadron deep into Vulcan territory using modified stealth technology based on deep-sea predator camouflage. Her ships could hide in the electromagnetic noise around gas giants and move through enemy sensor grids like shadows through water. Clark had learned her trade hunting pirates in the outer rim where the law was enforced by whoever had the biggest guns and the will to use them. She understood that space was not a place for the weak or hesitant. It was an environment that rewarded the strong and killed the careless. Remember, we're not here to fight fair, she told her squadron as they approached a Vulcan supply depot. We're here to show them that threatening humanity was the worst mistake they could make. Her ship struck the depot like lightning, destroying fuel reserves and ammunition stockpiles before vanishing back into the cosmic background radiation. The Vulcan garrison never even saw them coming. The alien response was exactly what human intelligence had predicted. Species that had submitted to Vulcan rule without resistance now watched in amazement as the Deathworlders not only fought back, but began winning. Some quietly withdrew their support from the Empire. Others started reaching out to human diplomatic channels. Dr. Kate Williams analyzed the intercepted communications from her command center beneath the mountains. The patterns were clear and consistent. Across dozens of species, fear was spreading through the galactic community, but it was not fear of humans, it was fear of what the humans might do to those who had supported their enemies. The crystalline hierarchy just recalled their ambassador from the Vulcan capital. She reported to President Hamilton, the Aquatic Federation is requesting a meeting with our diplomatic corps. Even the trade consortium is distancing themselves from the Empire. Hamilton studied the tactical displays showing human forces advancing on multiple fronts. How long before the Vulcan call for reinforcements from their other territories? They already have, Williams replied, but their subject species are developing sudden problems with ship maintenance and supply shortages. It seems nobody wants to fight the Deathworlders. The Vulcan Empire found itself in a position they had never experienced before. For the first time in their history, they were fighting an enemy that grew stronger as conditions became more desperate. Human crews operated damaged ships that should have been abandoned. Human soldiers continued fighting with wounds that would have killed alien warriors instantly. Disturbing still, the humans seemed to be enjoying themselves, intercepted. Communications showed crews laughing, while they fought battles that should have terrified any rational being. They made jokes about operating in radiation fields that registered lethal. They treated vacuum exposure as a minor inconvenience. Admiral Bennett's counteroffensive swept through the outer systems like a hurricane of destruction. Human ships appeared from nowhere, struck with overwhelming force, and vanished before enemy reinforcements could respond. They used tactics based on Earth's most successful predators, hunting in coordinated packs that confused and terrified their prey. The Velcan had expected to fight humans the way they fought other civilized species. Orderly formations, predictable strategies, and reasonable surrender when faced with superior numbers. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that used chaos as a weapon and thrived in conditions that would break any other military force. Engineer Chris Hayes commanded a flotilla of converted mining ships that had become the terror of Velcan supply lines. His vessels looked like industrial machinery rather than warships, but they carried enough firepower to destroy heavy cruisers. More importantly, they were crewed by humans who saw the vacuum of space as just another workplace target. Practice people, Hayes announced as his ships closed in on another Vulcan convoy. These supply runs are getting too easy. Maybe we should find ourselves some real warships to fight. His crews laughed as they deployed plasma cutters that could slice through any known armor. They had learned their trade in the asteroid belt, where every day brought new challenges that would kill softer species. Fighting alien warships was actually less dangerous than their regular jobs. The psychological impact on the Vulcan Empire was devastating. Their soldiers had been trained to fight civilized opponents who would surrender when faced with impossible odds. They had no experience dealing with enemies who seemed to grow more dangerous as their situation became more desperate. Velcan officers sent increasingly panicked reports back to their high command. They described human crews who continued fighting while their ships broke apart around them. They reported boarding parties who seemed immune to weapons that should have killed them instantly. They spoke of human warriors who appeared to be having fun while fighting battles that should have been nightmares. Colonel Nancy Foster's fighter squadrons had pushed deep into Velcan space, striking at targets that the enemy thought were safely protected. Her pilots used advanced stealth technology combined with tactics based on Earth's most successful aerial predators. The enemy is pulling back to their core systems, she reported during a briefing with Fleet Command. They're abandoning their outer colonies and concentrating their remaining forces around their home world. Admiral Bennett smiled grimly at the news. Good, let them huddle together in fear. We'll show the galaxy what happens when someone threatens all the survival of Deathers. The Galactic Council called for an emergency session to address the crisis. For the first time in their recorded history, they were watching a subject species not only resist conquest but turn the tables on their conquerors. The implications were staggering. Ambassador John Parker addressed the assembly with a simple message that would be remembered throughout galactic history. You wanted to see what Deathers could do when threatened with extinction. Now you know. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The silence that Followed his words spoke volumes. Every species in the galaxy was doing the same. Calculation: if humans could destroy the mighty Velkin Empire, what could they do to smaller, weaker civilizations that had supported humanity's enemies? The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted permanently, and everyone knew it. The age of easy conquest was over. The Deathworlders had announced their presence, and the universe would never be the same. The siege of Velkin Prime began on a Tuesday and lasted 6 months. The human fleet surrounded the alien home world, not with overwhelming numbers, but with a blockade so complete and efficient that it seemed to violate the laws of physics. Admiral Roy Bennett commanded the operation from the bridge of the UES Vengeance, watching as his ships moved through space like ghosts. They appeared on enemy sensors for brief moments before vanishing back into the cosmic background. Every attempt by the Velkin defenders to break through the human lines ended in complete disaster. The planet below was a garden world, exactly as Dr. Kate Williams had predicted. Perfect blue skies, gentle weather, and cities that looked like works of art. It was beautiful, peaceful, and completely unprepared for the reality of war against Deathworlders. Captain Jake Morrison's patrol ships had evolved into something far more dangerous during the months of fighting. The Liberty now bore the scars of dozens of battles, but her crew had become something that terrified enemy forces. Throughout the galaxy, they were veterans who had learned to fight in conditions that would kill any other species. Enemy supply convoy approaching from the outer system, reported Lieutenant Sam Davis from his position at the sensor station. 12 heavy transports with escort vessels. Morrison smiled coldly. Intercept and destroy? No. Survivors, no exceptions. They had their chance to surrender. The human response to Velkin supply runs had become legendary throughout the galaxy. Ships that tried to reach the besieged home world simply disappeared. Sometimes wreckage was found floating in space. Most of the time, there was nothing left to find at all. Engineer Paul Rodriguez had transformed his mining operations into a network of mobile weapons platforms that could appear anywhere in the system without warning. His ships used asteroid fields for cover and industrial equipment for weapons. The Velkin defenders never knew where the next attack would come from. Another convoy down, Rodriguez reported, as his plasma cutters finished with the latest supply run. That makes 47 this month. At this rate, they'll be eating their furniture within a few weeks. Blockade was more than just a military operation. It was a demonstration to the entire galaxy of what happened when someone threatened humanity with extinction. The Velkin Empire, which had ruled through fear and overwhelming force, found themselves trapped on their own home world like animals in a cage. President Lisa Hamilton received daily reports from the siege commanders while coordinating the broader human response to galactic politics. Representatives from dozens of species were requesting meetings, offering trade agreements, and desperately trying to distance themselves from the fallen empire. The crystalline hierarchy wants to formally apologize for supporting the Velkin ultimatum, reported Foreign Secretary Dan Cooper during the morning briefing. The Aquatic Federation is offering to pay reparations to human colonies that were threatened. Hamilton studied the diplomatic requests piling up on her desk. Fear was a powerful motivator, and the Galaxy was learning to fear humanity in ways they had never feared anyone before. Dr. Williams continued monitoring alien communications from her command center, tracking the psychological impact of the siege on species throughout the galaxy. The results were exactly what human strategists had hoped for. Panic is spreading through every major civilization, she reported. They're realizing that if we can destroy the Vulcan Empire, we can destroy anyone. Species that have never had a military are suddenly building defense fleets. The siege continued with mechanical precision. Human ships appeared, destroyed whatever they found, and vanished before enemy reinforcements could respond. The blockade was so complete that not even individual shuttles could reach the planet's surface. Inside the Velkin capital, Emperor Vastor watched his empire crumble from his palace throne room. The vast holographic displays that had once shown his fleets conquering the galaxy now tracked the systematic destruction of everything he had built. How many ships do we have left? He asked his military advisor, General Cathmer. 17 functional vessels in the home system, the general replied, his voice hollow with defeat. Perhaps 30 more scattered across our former territories, but most of those are requesting permission to surrender to human forces. The Emperor stared at the tactical display showing human ships moving through his system like deadly shadows. What do they want? We've offered them tribute territory, even our complete withdrawal from their space. Why won't they negotiate? General Cathar had been asking himself the same question for months. I believe they want us to experience what we tried to do to them, Your Majesty, complete and total surrender. The answer came 2 days later when Admiral Bennett transmitted his terms directly to the Imperial Palace. The message was broadcast on all frequency so that every being in the system could hear it. This is Admiral Roy Bennett of the United Earth Space Navy speaking to the Velkin Empire and all who served it. You came to our space demanding unconditional surrender. You threatened our families, our children, and our very existence. You spoke of mercy while planning genocide. Bennett's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Now you will learn what real consequences look like. The terms are simple and non-negotiable. Complete surrender of all Velkin military forces, war crime tribunals for your leadership, reparations to every species you have subjugated, and the understanding that humanity is now watching you. Emperor Vastor finally requested a meeting with human leadership after 6 months of siege. The meeting took place aboard the UES Liberty in the same conference room where Captain Morrison had first received the Velkin ultimatum. Morrison now wore the uniform of a fleet admiral, promoted through combat and victory. Rather than politics, his face carried new scars from battles across the galaxy, and his eyes held the cold certainty of someone who had seen the true face of war. The Emperor entered the room accompanied by 2 guards, looking around nervously at the human officers who stood at attention. Everything about the ship spoke of functionality over beauty, strength over elegance. This was a vessel built by a species that valued survival above all else. Admiral Morrison, the Emperor, began, his translator converting his words into human speech. We expected you to show mercy, to accept reasonable terms for the greater good of galactic peace. Morrison's response became legendary throughout the galaxy, repeated in 1,000 languages on a million worlds. You came to our home, speaking of mercy while threatening to exterminate us. You expected us to surrender because you thought we were weak. You forgot that mercy is something you earn, not something you demand. He leaned forward in his chair, his scarred hands clasped on the table. And you never bothered to learn what happens when you threaten the survival of Deathworlders. The formal surrender ceremony took place on Earth itself, in the same chamber where the Global Defense Council had first received the Vulcan ultimatum. Representatives from across the galaxy watched as the most powerful military empire in known space submitted to a species they had dismissed as primitive savages. The terms were harsh but fair. The Vulcan leadership would face justice for their crimes, but their people would survive. Their military would be disbanded, but they would be allowed to rebuild as a peaceful civilization. Most importantly, they would serve as an example to the galaxy of what happened when someone threatened humanity. Dr. Williams published her final report on the conflict, noting that humanity's success had not come from superior technology or overwhelming numbers. It had come from their fundamental nature as survivors from a world that had never shown them mercy. Captain Amy Clark received command of humanity's new deep space exploration fleet, tasked with making contact with other species and establishing humanity's place in the galactic community. Her ships carried a simple message: humans preferred peace, but they were more than capable of war. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson about underestimating Deathworlders. Humanity had learned something equally important about their own capabilities. When pushed to the edge of extinction, the balance of power had shifted permanently, and everyone knew it. In the years that followed, the phrase "they expected mercy" became a warning. Throughout the galaxy, it reminded every species of what happened when civilized beings forgot that some creatures had evolved not in gardens, but in crucibles that forged them into something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The age of easy conquest was over. The Deathworlders had claimed their place among the stars, and the universe would never be the